Hey guys, happy Memorial Day. Hope you guys enjoyed the weekend. I'm not posting this video till Tuesday morning, so by now for you guys the weekend's over. Hope you had a good Memorial Day. I'm going to talk about Memorial Day in a minute, but I just realized tonight I haven't been doing joke of the week. So I got a joke of the week for you this week. Uh, why did the motorcycle take a nap? Because he was too tired. Yeah, uh, that's not funny. That's just the joke of the week. Ouch! Did you see that? Now that's funny. Don't try that at home. Okay, Memorial Day was Monday. So just want to tell you what Memorial Day is all about. I mean, hey, I'm your history teacher. I should be bringing this stuff up, right? So normally Memorial Day is that Monday that we have school off. Of course, we've had every Monday with school off for like 2 months here, but typically this is a weekend we look forward to for that reason. But there's a serious reason why we celebrate Memorial Day. So I scanned this off of Wikipedia. It was a nice little write up here. Just going to read it to you. Memorial Day used to be called Decoration Day. And the reason why is because if you are wounded in battle or if you do something brave and get a medal in the Army or Navy or one of the armed forces, they call that being decorated. You get the little medal on your uniform and get to decorate your uniform with it. So this is a federal holiday in the United States, which means banks, schools, anything that has to do with the government are closed for the day. And it is for honoring and mourning the military personnel who have died while serving in the United States Armed Forces. The holiday is now observed on the last Monday of May, having been observed on May 30th from 1868 to 1970. So this holiday goes all the way back to 1868, which is just after the Civil War. And on this day, many people take the time to visit cemeteries and memorials to honor people who died while serving in the military. You don't need a family member in the military to do that. My family and my sister, every Memorial Day, takes her family to the cemetery and puts wreaths and flags on graves of veterans. And my family does that too when we have the time because I have 4 kids. So sometimes we miss it, but it's a tradition that a lot of people have to either visit a cemetery or visit a memorial. And there are actually several memorials. I mean, I could probably spend too much time talking about this, but in the Rochester area, there's several places to go. A really, really cool one is in Highland Park. It's the Vietnam War Memorial. Check that out sometime if you have the chance. So the other big deal about Memorial Day is this is considered the unofficial start of summer in the United States. And this year, it certainly felt like summer. While Labor Day, the first Monday of September, is the unofficial start of autumn. Of course, summer really doesn't start until like June 21st, and it runs until the middle of September. But just unofficially, this is kind of like when people consider summer to start. 2 other days to celebrate those who've served in the military, so don't confuse Memorial Day with Veterans Day, which honors anyone who served in the United States Armed Forces. That one is in November. And Armed Forces Day, which is an unofficial U.S. holiday to honor people who are currently serving in the armed forces. That takes place earlier in May. Okay, so this week's lesson, we're continuing with our theme Americans Moved West, and going to add in a new theme, Slavery Divides Us. And look, here's my goal for this week. See the map on the left? I need you to know that map. See the picture on the right? Need you to understand that picture and what's going on in that picture, because that picture is in virtually every United States history book you are ever going to open. And of course, I have 2 readings for you this week. If you read the bulletin, you notice that the quiz this week is going to be based on those 2 readings. And I know I'm assigning this on Tuesday and the deadline is Friday, but that deadline is really just for my grading purposes to keep me organized. So I don't expect you have everything done by Friday. It is 2 readings. I'd like you to take the time on those readings and do your best on the questions. Plus, it's the video. But again, Friday's a deadline for me. It'd be nice if you had it done by then, but you have until next week to get that done. So Americans moved west. Last week, we saw how technology played a role in Americans moving west. So check out this picture for a second. This is Americans moving west, and we talked a lot last week about the steam engine. Hey, what do you see in this picture? What is this? It's a steam wagon. Holy smoke. Ah, yeah, that wasn't funny. Holy smoke. See the smokestack here? With the smoke coming out. Yes, some early wagons were actually powered by this new steam engine. That's why all the people are inside, right? Instead of pushing the wagon. Oh, wait, they had horses for that. And of course, you're asking, well, if it's a kind of steam engine, what do they have the horses for? In case they run out of steam. No, seriously, guys, if you're fast forwarding through the video, you're going to get this question wrong. There was never a steam wagon. No, this is not a steam wagon. That's a little cook stove that they got inside. They're cooking their breakfast. Come on. This is not a steam wagon. Just a little joke I'm playing on you. How about some real steam-powered machines? Railroads played a big part in Americans moving west. We saw that in last week's video. The Transcontinental Railroad. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but it's a term you need to know. It's going to come up maybe next year as well. The Transcontinental Railroad was a railroad that cut clear across the country. One railroad company began in Omaha. The other railroad company began in Sacramento, California. They started building from this direction and this direction, and in 1869 they met here in Promontory Point, Utah, and at that point the country was connected. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, you could literally take a train across the country. Oh, another invention. Check this out. I love this photograph. This is a photograph of the workers on the Transcontinental Railroad, some of whom were Chinese. Some of these were Chinese immigrants to California. I just noticed these really small people here. I'm not sure what's going on. Are those kids? But these are railroad workers. These are the steel rails. These are the wooden ties. And talk about back-breaking work. I mean, come on. Foot by foot, they built this thing by hand across the country. And running alongside it, another important invention that had to do with communication. And here they are, the telegraph poles, not telephone poles, not electric poles. Electricity had not been harnessed yet in a way that we could power things. Okay, so there's no wall sockets or light bulbs in the 1860s, and the telephone was probably, let's see, maybe 40 years away. This is the telegraph, which was a little device smaller than a desktop, which could send little signals, just little pulses, little beeps. Let's see if maybe we can get some sound effects for that. And then you string together those beeps into a code, and someone on the other end of this line, which did carry electric pulses, but like not enough electricity even to shock you, really. It was just little tiny pulses of electricity that could be translated into messages. And then the person on their other end would write that message down or type that message up and hand you the slip of paper, and there you go. You have your telegram, which is a typed message that comes off these poles that carry this electric pulse and could literally carry a message across the country. So a big breakthrough in communication that took place around the same time that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, actually earlier than that. Okay, so here we have this painting, which, like I said, is in virtually every history book. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to guess the title of the painting. But let's just start by looking at the details of what's going on in this painting. So at this point, I'd like you to pause the video and just check it out, because I usually do this lesson in class, and every year someone points out something that I missed. There's just so many little details in this painting. So please just pause it for a second and check it out. Now, two things I want you to notice about this painting are technology and consequences. Let's start with technology. Take a look at the painting. What are some new forms of technology that you see in the painting that would have helped Americans move west? And you probably noticed we've got steam trains, possibly steamboats. I see sailboats, but this might be a steamboat here. The railroad tracks, this lady that we'll talk about later, the angel or whatever you want to call her, holding the telegraph wires, and then simple forms of technology, the covered wagon. So please don't think that everyone who moved west had the benefits of all these technological advances. A lot of times the people on the frontier were just, surviving in the wilderness, building a log cabin out of trees, starting a fire with 2 sticks. They had some real survival skills. Consequences. What are some negative consequences of Americans moving west that you see in this painting? And so you might have noticed here, we've got at least one group of people who did not benefit from Americans moving west, and that would be the Native Americans, who in this painting look like they're being chased off the land, along with the buffalo and other forms of wildlife. So Americans moving westward was not good for everybody. And that's what we're going to see in our video clip that we're going to be watching next. We're going to see some of those negative consequences of Americans moving west.
In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that all people are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what is happiness, and how do you pursue it? And what has happiness got to do with American freedom? In the early years of the nation, there were lots of answers to the question of how to pursue happiness. Some said happiness was being rich. Some said it was going to school or having a healthy family. Daniel Boone said happiness could be found by going west and seeking a new life across the Appalachians.
Curiosity is natural to the soul of man. I left my family and domestic happiness for a time to wander through the wilderness of America.
Daniel Boone was an adventurer who went searching for a land across the mountains that the Indians called Kentucky, which meant meadowland. It was said to be beautiful country, filled with high grasses, birds, buffalo, deer, and beaver. But the search for Kentucky was anything but easy.
My footsteps have been marked with blood. 2 darling sons and a brother have I lost to savage hands. Many dark and sleepless nights have I been separated from the cheerful society of men. But after a long and fatiguing journey through the mountainous wilderness, we saw with pleasure the beautiful level of Kentucky.
The Indian trail that Boone had discovered winding through the mountains stretched for 300 miles. Boone blazed it and widened it, and within the next 2 decades, 200,000 people went west in search of happiness along what would become known as the Wilderness Road.
Thus we behold Kentucky, lately a howling wilderness, now become the habitation of civilization.
In the decades following Daniel Boone's trailblazing, the movement westward continued. The goal now became to cross the Missouri River and settle lands in the great open prairies beyond. After Mexico became independent of Spain in 1821, wagon loads of traders began pushing southwest, cutting deep ruts in a path that was called the Santa Fe Trail.
bound away across the wide Missouri.
Only a few American women had ever attempted to make the grueling trip when 18-year-old Susan McGoffin headed west from Missouri. Newly married and pregnant, she was excited by the adventure.
Oh, this is a life I would not exchange for a good deal. There is such independence, so much free, uncontaminated air, which impregnates the mind, the feelings, nay, every thought, with purity. I breathe free without that oppression and uneasiness felt in the gossiping circles of a settled home.
Soon, hundreds of thousands of Americans were discovering the freedom and opportunity of the Great West, including a Missouri farmer who wrote home to his mother, trying to convince her to join him.
Out in Oregon, I can get me a square mile of land and a quarter section for each of y'all. Dad burden me, I'm done with the country. Winters, it's frost and snow to freeze a body. Summers, the overflow from the old muddy drowns half my acres. Taxes take the yield of them that's left. What say, Ma? It's God's country.
It is possible that friends are overawed by power. It cannot overawe me. The people are the sovereign power. The officers are their agents.
Andrew Jackson was nicknamed Old Hickory because this man from the West was as tough as hickory wood. He had started out life as a poor man in Tennessee and had risen to become a general in the War of 1812. That war against England was called the Second War for Independence, and in it, Andrew Jackson became a national hero. When he was elected the 7th President of the United States in 1828, he was the first chief executive not from Virginia or Massachusetts. And the people, ordinary people, knew they had finally elected one of their own. On Inauguration Day, it seemed as if they all came out to celebrate.
The rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their selfish purposes. The humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers have a right to complain.
But the first people's president didn't care about the rights of some of the people, the Native Americans. Like most white Americans, Jackson wanted Indian land, but didn't know a fair way to get it. The problem with the Indians, he said, was that they were savages and uncivilized, and that meant he could simply take their land.
Those tribes cannot exist surrounded by our settlements. They have neither the intelligence nor the moral habits. Established in the midst of a superior race, they must disappear.
But the Cherokees, whose land stretched across the southern Appalachian Mountains in a semicircle that reached from Kentucky to Alabama, confounded the whites. They farmed, built schools, formed a government, and built a capital city. They became prosperous and didn't fit the Indian stereotype. But the wealthier the Cherokees became, the more anxious other people were to have their land. A Cherokee spokesman gave voice to his people's worries.
We are aware that some persons suppose it will be for our advantage to remove beyond the Mississippi. We think otherwise. We wish to remain on the land of our fathers. We have a perfect and original right to remain. The treaties with us guarantee our residence and our privileges and secure us against intruders. Our only request is that these treaties be fulfilled.
But in 1830, following intense debate, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. That made it legal to throw the natives off their land and move them west. In Georgia, the government held a lottery and gave away Cherokee land to white settlers.
The Cherokee happened to sit on very valuable land which cotton plantation owners wanted for the expansion of slavery. And so under the presidency of Andrew Jackson and then Van Buren, you had the Cherokee removal, the forced removal of many thousands of men, women, and children out to new lands in Oklahoma. Of course, they didn't want to go, but they had no choice. The Army moved them out, and on that long so-called Trail of Tears, maybe a quarter of them died along the way. This was certainly one of the most shameful moments in American history. If you want to use a modern term, you'd have to call it the ethnic cleansing of the United States, the removal of a people purely because of their racial and ethnic status to make way for white settlers taking over their land.
Many Indians in the East had long seen what was coming. The great orator, Chief Red Jacket of the Iroquois, once spoke to a delegation of white clergymen.
Brothers, our seats were once large, and yours were small. You have now become a great people, and we have scarcely a place left to spread our blankets. You have got our country, but are not satisfied. You want to force your religion upon us. Brothers, we only want to enjoy our own.
Tecumseh, the great Shawnee warrior leader, summed up the plight of Native Americans.
We gave them forest-clad mountains, valleys full of game. In return, they gave us rum and trinkets and a grave.
A very sad story, the Trail of Tears, and ultimately probably cost Andrew Jackson his face on the $20 bill, because if you haven't heard, he's scheduled to be replaced by Harriet Tubman. I think that was supposed to take place in 2020, but last I heard that's been delayed until 2028. Now I want to go back and recap how America grew in size, starting with the original 13 states. That would be chunk A on this map. And then at the end of the American Revolution, America gained all this land here, chunk B, which is basically the land that Americans were told they couldn't move into with the Proclamation of 1763, which was one of the things that started the American Revolution to begin with. So we win all that land up to the Mississippi River. And then we buy chunk C from France in 1803. I'm going to put these notes on the screen. These notes are in your unit packet. If you have a unit packet, if you were able to print that off, you can copy the notes down. Might be helpful. Not necessary though, but they're here, so at any time you can pause the video and copy them down. This is just a recap of what we just talked about with America growing in size. And then I have some notes here on the Trail of Tears. There's just one thing I want to point out on these notes that was not included in the video, and that is this term reservations. Reservations refers to land that was set aside for Native American groups who were removed from their homelands, including the Cherokee. You can see the Cherokee on the map here. These are the Cherokee groups. This is where they were moved to on the Trail of Tears. But you can see that there were many other groups that were also removed from the east to the west, including the Iroquois. Although in the case of the Iroquois, they were given reservations in their own territory, basically in New York State, and some reservations up in Canada. All of this land in yellow was essentially Iroquois territory, going back, say, 300 years ago. What they've been left with are these little blobs of color, the yellow, the blue, the red, the green. Those are Iroquois Indian reservations. The closest to us is probably this reservation here that I've been to. But a very sad story in the case of the Iroquois and in the case of many Native American groups. Now, there have been a lot of groups that have been oppressed in American history, and nothing to take away from those groups. But one thing that I think gets lost in the history books is there was no other group of people who were oppressed and who lost more than the Native Americans. So a very sad story, and certainly not the proudest moment in American history, that in order to move west, we had to take this land from someone, and that someone was the Native Americans. So moving ahead on our map, in the year, say, 1803, 1805, the United States of America included all this territory here. And in 1819, we gained Florida from Spain. And this little chunk up here, we get in 1818. But just, I want you to see the overall borders of the United States would have included everything to the border of Texas, which at the time was not part of the United States. In fact, Texas was part of Mexico. So by 1836, I think it was around 1820, 1821, you can look it up, Mexico fought their own revolution against Spain. Think back to the beginning of the year when we talked about the conquistadors, those early Spanish explorers who took over much of Central and South America. And also the conquistadors got as far north as the southwest region of the United States. So this land was controlled by Spain. But again, around 1821, Mexico fights a revolution against Spain and they get their freedom. So going back to this map here, what you see in orange and blue and red here was part of Mexico, including Texas. But the thing was, Texas was mostly empty land. So the Mexicans were looking to get people to move to Texas. And to encourage this, they were giving out free land in Texas if people moved there and became Mexican citizens. And some Americans cross the border and they take the deal. They become Mexican citizens. They take their free land, and I like to call these people Texicans. They're no longer American citizens. They're now Mexican citizens, but they came from America. And they become unhappy with Mexico, and they eventually declare independence. And the funny thing about this, not funny in a ha-ha way, but funny in an ironic way, is that these Americans who moved to Texas fight this battle for independence against Mexico, many of whom are looked at as heroes, especially in this Battle of the Alamo. Well, guess what was the number one reason why they were upset with the Mexicans? Because the Mexicans didn't allow slaves. And a lot of these Texicans, when they moved to Mexico, they had brought their slaves with them. The Mexicans said, hey, that's not cool. No slavery in Mexico. And the Americans basically thumbed their nose at that and said, too bad, we're keeping our slaves. A lot of people forget that. But this battle for Texas independence from Mexico was in some ways a battle over slavery. And the Texicans, the people living in Texas, win this war. They become an independent country in 1836. So Texas is one of, I think, 4 states that used to be its own country. And they named their country the Lone Star Republic. And you can see why with their flag, which you see waving on the screen here. So this chunk of land here was Texas. It was an independent country. By the way, here's a picture of the Alamo where that famous battle was fought. But although the Texicans, or Texans, as we can now call them Texans, are independent, they have their own country, what they really want is to rejoin the United States. And they ask the Americans to annex them, to take over Texas and make it a new state. But for about 10 years, the Americans don't do this. And the reason why, can you guess it? Is slavery. People in the North don't want Texas to join because some of the Texans own slaves. People in the South would be happy to have a new slave state join the United States. And this battle rages on in the United States Congress, like I said, for almost 10 years, until finally in 1844, the United States, let's go back to our map here, 1845, the United States annexes Texas. So by 1845, the United States borders included all of this and this. And shortly thereafter, the United States signed a treaty with England and got the Oregon country up here. But what was left was this chunk of land down here, which some Americans wanted, but it still belonged to Mexico. So we're going to see what happened next in our next video clip.
In 1844, James K. Polk of Tennessee was elected President of the United States. Like his hero, Andrew Jackson, he believed in his country's right to lands in the West. Polk wanted Oregon and also California, which was owned by Mexico. Many white Americans believed they had a natural right to the land. They called this privilege manifest destiny. Those words, written by a reporter named Jane Casno, were first published in 1845 by newspaper owner John O'Sullivan.
It is our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions.
Manifest means obvious or not open to dispute or debate. What he meant was that the destiny of the United States to take over the whole continent of North America, to spread to the Pacific, to spread to Canada, Mexico, to occupy this entire great landmass was obvious. You couldn't even dispute it. It had been given by God to the United States, and it was part of this expansion of liberty. Once you say that your destiny, your future is ordained by God, that it represents the future of freedom, once you say it's obvious and not open to dispute, then anything you do is justifiable.
In 1846, the second year of his presidency, Polk signed a treaty with Great Britain giving England the territory which today is Western Canada. In return, the U.S. took what is now Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana. Then President Polk went to war against Mexico.
The war with Mexico was forced upon us. Yet it was clear that we would, if practicable, obtain California and such other portions of the Mexican territory as would be sufficient to defray the expenses of the war.
The war lasted for 2 years. When it ended in 1848, the border between Texas and Mexico was set at the Rio Grande River, and the United States also got California, which at that time meant land that stretched from Texas to the Pacific Ocean and as far north as Wyoming. When gold was discovered that same year in California, it lured people westward in ever greater numbers. Gold fever became a national epidemic. Louise Clapp was an Eastern journalist who traveled to California to report on the gold camps.
Gold mining is nature's great lottery scheme. A man may work a claim for many months and be poorer at the end of the time than when he commenced, or he may take out thousands in a few hours. It is a mere matter of chance.
Gold was also found in Oregon, Nevada, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado, and Alaska. Stories of lucky miners filled the newspapers, and that kept people coming. They came from almost every country you could imagine, in search of economic opportunity, for happiness, and for personal freedom. America was becoming a country of immigrants.
Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri.
Check. Mic check. Gotta love that old-time banjo music. Listen, let me straighten you out on this deal with Mexico. We picked a fight with Mexico. We bullied Mexico. We wanted Mexico's stuff. They wouldn't give it to us. So we started a fight with a country that we knew we could beat, and then we took their stuff at the end. That's how that deal went. We took Texas. Actually, Texas took itself from Mexico when they declared independence. But when we annexed Texas, you can imagine how Mexico felt about that. Then we went to Mexico and said, hey, will you let us buy all this land? They said no. So what did we do? We started a war with a country that we knew we could beat. And we basically invaded them. We moved our army across the border and said, oh, we're going to change the border now. It's further to the south. Yeah, that's called invading them. And that started a war. At the end of the war, we told Mexico, the whole thing was your fault. And to pay us back, you're going to pay us by giving us all the land here that we wanted to begin with. Yeah, that's how that went. I'm not even sugarcoating it. That is what happened in the Mexican-American War. So this final, well, actually, it's not the final chunk of land here. Let's go back. F is Texas on this map. G, in the meantime, we got this other sort of negotiation going on with England, and we negotiate and we sign a treaty that gives us this area and it gives England this area up here, which is Canada today. And then we start this war with Mexico, and at the end of the war, we get H, the Mexican Cession. And if you're wondering about I, a few years later, we went back to Mexico and said, hey, can we have this chunk of land? We'll pay you like $5 million for it. And Mexico said, yeah, okay, just take it so we can be done with all these problems with you Americans. And here are the notes. This is just a recap of everything that I just talked about. We annexed Texas in 1845. We started a war with them war with Mexico in 1846. The war ends in 1848. Mexican agrees to this thing called the Mexican Cession, which, by the way, cession, kind of a weird word. It starts with a C, not an S. It comes from the word cede, which means to be forced to give something up. Mexico was forced to give up this big chunk of territory, which includes the future states of Nevada, California, and Arizona. And that's going to become a big deal because the very next year, in 1849, guess what is discovered in California? If you did the readings for homework, or if you did the readings that were assigned to you, you already know the answer is gold. Can you imagine Mexico when they get the news that the land that they had to give up because of this war with America, they just discovered gold on it? Yeah, not a happy day for Mexico. Now we're going to come back to this painting to wrap things up. I have a research project for you. It's going to take you probably under a minute. I'd like you to do a Google image search for each of these vocab terms, and then you tell me which one of these vocab terms would give you this image in a Google image search. And of course, the answer is manifest destiny. You probably got 2 different versions of this painting. Manifest destiny is not the title of the painting, but it is the word that's most commonly associated with this painting. And of course, right in the middle of the painting, the most obvious thing that strikes you is this woman here. I like to call this painting the amazing flying lady, right? She's flying, so you know she's not real, right? She must be a symbol. She must represent something. And sometimes you hear people say, well, she represents manifest destiny. This idea that Americans had a God-given right to take over all this land and move west. And in a way she does, but this woman also just represents America. So let's talk for a minute about different symbols for America and how they've sort of evolved over American history. We've already seen that in the beginning, America was symbolized by the snake, with Ben Franklin's famous political cartoon, this American flag from the American Revolution. We know the eagle has been an important symbol of America ever since the official seal of the United States was established by John Hanson under the Articles of Confederation. But also America tended to be represented by a young Indian woman early in American history, and then that young Indian woman evolved into sort of a Greek maiden or Greek goddess. And sometimes that Greek goddess was called Columbia. And ultimately that led to the most famous image probably for America, the Statue of Liberty. So this is a common theme in American history, that America has been represented by a young woman, or an angel, you might even say. And this angel is carrying a school book. You might not have been able to make that out from this image, but she's carrying a school book, which might represent education and knowledge. She's carrying the telegraph poles, which would represent the technology that is spreading westward. All the movement in the picture is from east to west, or from right to left. And another thing that someone always points out when we look at this painting in class is when you divide the painting in half, you can see that the right side of the painting is all light, and then the left side is all dark. So America, knowledge, new inventions, westward expansion. America is bringing all of these new technologies and benefits of their version of civilization westward with them, pushing the Native Americans, and in this case also the wildlife, right, off of the land. So what do you think the title of this painting is? You can take a guess, but I am going to tell you here that the title of the painting is American Progress, and it was painted by John Gast in 1872. And I just want to say that this painting is a good example of point of view. It is one person's point of view on westward expansion as America pushed further to the west and took over land and expanded their frontiers. From the American point of view, this would be a good thing. It was progress. America was bringing all of their knowledge and inventions with them as they moved west. But as a challenge, I always like to ask kids, how would this painting look differently if it was made from the point of view of a Native American? And if we were in school, I would offer that as a bonus assignment to redraw this painting from the perspective of the Indians. That's something you could still do. I'd love to see your final result, your final project. If you wanted to draw that out, kind of like a political cartoon, and scan it to me, that would be awesome. But just think about that, how this painting is really about one point of view, the point of view of Americans, of, I guess you really should say, of white Americans, European Americans, Americans with a European heritage who came to this country and then proceeded to take it over using this concept of manifest destiny to justify it, to say, that's okay, you know, this land really belongs to us, when in fact there were many other groups of people who were here before them. And that wraps up our lesson for this week. We're just going to have a last set of questions where I ask you to identify the important areas of land on this map. You're not going to need to know all of them, but the major ones that we talked about, you will need to know. Answer those questions. Be sure to complete the 2 readings that I assigned this week, along with the follow-up quiz, and that will complete your lesson for the week. And I will see you next week.